So, January 1973. After years and years of brutal war, the world is watching. A peace treaty gets signed in Paris. This is it, right? The end of the Vietnam War. But then, fast forward just 2 years, and you have this incredible scene. North Vietnamese tanks smashing through the gates of the presidential palace in Saigon. The whole thing just collapses. So what happened? How does a treaty that's supposed to guarantee peace lead to a final crushing defeat? I mean, it's a huge contradiction, right? Peace treaties are supposed to end wars, not just, hit the pause button. But the crazy thing is, the answer to this mystery, the seeds of Saigon's fall in 75, they were planted right there in the very words of the 1973 agreement itself. Okay, so let's start with what everyone thought was happening. When that agreement was signed, you could practically hear a global sigh of relief. On paper, it looked perfect. It had all the right ingredients to stop the fighting, and crucially, for the U.S. to finally bring its troops home. And the main point seemed pretty straightforward. A complete ceasefire, all U.S. troops out within 60 days, and every prisoner of war returned. Simple. It looked like that peace with honor everyone had been talking about. But here's the kicker. The real problem wasn't what was in the treaty. It was what was very, very deliberately left out. You see, underneath that hopeful surface, the Paris Peace Accords were, they were built on a really shaky foundation. It was full of these fatal flaws that basically made the whole ceasefire impossible to enforce. It was pretty much doomed from the get-go. The agreement was super specific, meticulous, about getting American and other allied forces out. But it was completely, totally silent about another foreign army that was already operating on South Vietnamese soil. And this wasn't some minor oversight, you guys. This was the single fatal flaw of the entire deal. And this is the number that changes everything. The treaty had zero, and I mean zero, provision for the 145,000 North Vietnamese soldiers who were already inside South Vietnam. They didn't have to leave. They just stayed. Think about that. An entire army just camped out deep inside enemy territory, and now they're legally allowed to stay put after a peace treaty is signed. It's wild. Even Henry Kissinger, the guy who basically wrote the thing, admitted it just days before it was signed. And listen to how carefully he words this. He says the agreement doesn't give them the right to be there. But, and this is the crucial part, it also doesn't create any way to make them leave. So the North Vietnamese army was just there, an army in place, ready to go. When you lay it all out, the imbalance is just staggering. So on one side, you have North Vietnam's army, staying right where it is. On the other, the U.S. military has to withdraw completely. The North, they can get unlimited resupply from their allies through Laos and Cambodia. But the South, they're stuck with a really strict piece-for-piece replacement rule, and they can't even attack those enemy supply lines. The whole playing field was just completely tilted. And believe me, those supply corridors were everything. The Ho Chi Minh Trail wasn't just a path. It was the absolute lifeblood of North Vietnam's war machine. Now, the agreement did say that all foreign troops had to get out of Laos and Cambodia. But that promise, it just never happened. Instead of leaving, the North Vietnamese actually started upgrading the trail, turning it into this modern, all-weather highway, all while this supposed ceasefire was in effect. So you might be asking, well, who was supposed to be enforcing all this? Good question. There was an international commission, but honestly, it was a total watchdog with no teeth. 2 of its 4 members, Poland and Hungary, were from the Soviet bloc, and they just consistently blocked any investigation into what North Vietnam was doing. They wouldn't even monitor the key entry points where all these new troops and supplies were pouring into the South. The whole thing was so broken that Canada, one of the original members, just quit. They were that disgusted. So let's recap. You've got a deeply flawed treaty and you've got nobody to enforce it. What do you think is going to happen? Well, the result was pretty inevitable. The ceasefire was just a name. On the ground in Vietnam, the war never actually stopped. It just shifted into a new and honestly kind of more cynical phase. Okay, take a look at this. This is what the front line looks like right before the so-called peace treaty. It's not some clean line on a map, is it? It's a total mess, a patchwork of contested ground. People called it a leopard skin pattern, and you can see why. Both armies were just deeply tangled up with each other. The ceasefire didn't pull them apart, it just froze them right where they were, often literally within shouting distance of each other. And just look at the forces lined up here. On the one hand, you've got South Vietnam's best units, their elite troops, holding the line. But look what they're up against, a huge concentration of North Vietnamese power. We're talking at least 5 full combat divisions. And let's be clear, these aren't guerrilla fighters anymore. This is a modern conventional army with tanks, heavy artillery, the whole shebang. And they're all dug in, just waiting for the next round. And that's exactly what happened. The U.S. Army's own history of this is incredibly blunt about it. It says, and I'm quoting here, "A third Indochina War began immediately." I mean, the ink on the peace accords was barely dry, and the fighting started right back up again, sometimes even more intensely than before, as both sides scrambled to grab more land. So you have a flawed treaty, you have a war that never actually ended. All of this was just setting the stage for the final, total collapse. The Paris Accords didn't create peace. What they really did was start a 2-year ticking clock for South Vietnam. And this right here was the decisive moment, the test case. In late 1974, North Vietnam launches a huge conventional attack to take over an entire province. Now, this wasn't just about gaining territory. It was a test, a political test. They wanted to know one thing. Would America come back? Were the B-52s going to return to the skies to save their ally? And the answer was a deafening no. The U.S. was tangled up in its own problems at home and did absolutely nothing. For Hanoi, that was it. That was the green light they had been waiting for. So when you boil it all down, you can see this simple, tragic path. Step 1, a flawed treaty gets signed that leaves a massive enemy army in place. Step 2, the military balance just completely shifts as the North builds up its forces and the South gets left behind. And step 3, well, that's the inevitable collapse of this fake ceasefire into a final, full-scale invasion. Which really just leaves us with this one big, haunting question. Given everything that was in that treaty, and everything that wasn't, was the fall of South Vietnam just inevitable? Was the ending already written back in 1973? It's a pretty sobering thought, isn't it? That a document designed to bring peace might have actually done the exact opposite, and guaranteed one last decisive war.